Can you take us through what's happened there today and what to expect with this just announced Friday of anger?
Well, when we compare the situation to what took place yesterday, most certainly significantly calmer, but that does not mean that this crisis is by any stretch of the imagination over. The streets of Cairo were pretty empty throughout the entire day. Of course, now there is that curfew in place. Second night in a row that we've had the curfew here. State of emergency also, of course, to be lasting for about a month. You were talking about the attacks on the churches there. Well, actually, we've been hearing various reports that the number is much, much higher, at least 30 to have been attacked across the entire country. Many people were warning prior to this violent crackdown that this would be the type of spillover, ripple effect violence that the country could have expected to see in the aftermath. One of the many reasons why people were trying to urge the government to continue to pursue a peaceful solution. The Ministry of Interior also, Anderson, announcing following a number of attacks on police stations and on government institutions that it had authorized its troops to use lethal force if such attacks took place once again. Of course, everyone very anxious about what tomorrow's going to bring, especially with those mass demonstrations being called for by the Muslim Brotherhood, those expected to take place after noon prayers not too far from where we are right now, Anderson.
Mona, you say you support neither the military nor the Muslim Brotherhood, but if you support neither, then who are you left with? And is that part of the problem right now, that there's basically these polarized sides in Egypt?
Yeah, absolutely, Anderson. I mean, I support neither side, but I want to make it very clear that I unequivocally condemn the mass killing by security forces yesterday and condemn the attacks on churches across the country. And our biggest and most urgent need right now is to stop the killing and stop the blood, because in one day yesterday, almost as many Egyptians were killed in that one day as they were during the 18 days that took us to get rid of Hosni Mubarak. Now, we do need somebody who's an alternative to the Muslim Brotherhood and the military, because we're constantly pushed to choose between the two. And I don't think that Egypt needs to choose between the two. Egypt is much bigger than that. And we need people. Now, I personally support the decision by Mohamed al-Baradei yesterday to resign in protest at the mass killings and the violence, because I think he took a principled stand, and we need more voices like him, which exist. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood and the military are not the only Egyptians around. There are many more. And we need to hear someone like Baradei and someone in that camp that says, I reject violence from the security forces and the violence that we've heard coming from the Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters, and say that for the sake of Egypt, the path we should be walking towards is the path of freedom and the path that recognizes all rights. Our revolution did not call for an Islamist state, nor did it call for military rule.
Robin, the Egyptian ambassador to the U.S. says that this is the most serious juncture Egypt has been in the last 30 years. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And this is a real challenge for the Obama administration. After all, the military has been the cornerstone of U.S. relations since the peace treaty, since the Egyptians walked away from their relationship with the Soviet Union. All of the presidents since the monarchy was ousted in 1952 have come from the military until Mohamed Morsy. And this is a moment where the United States really has to review its relations with Egypt, with the military, many of whom whose leaders were trained in the United States. It has some tough decisions to make. What the president said today had some tough words, but the action was actually rather symbolic. There are tough questions about not just aid, but actually whether the United States has enough influence to really make a difference, because the military is basically kind of sticking it to Washington and has indicated it's prepared to take its own action irrespective of what its allies or the international community has said in condemning what's happened in the last week.
Ari, President Obama said today in part that the U.S. doesn't take sides with any particular party or political figure in Egypt. Do you buy that?
Well, that's the right thing to say, and we should not take sides. We have two bad sides to take a choice between. But we did take sides previously. Remember, this is the president who said that President Mubarak must go. And so we have weighed into Egyptian affairs previously, just 2 years ago. And now we're the consequences, not of what we did, but what the Egyptians are going through or on ourselves and on all the world. You know, I think this is like the French Revolution, Anderson. We're going to see this shift back and forth between one pole to the other pole. In the case of the French Revolution, it was the monarchists against all the revolutionaries. Here in Egypt, it's going to be the Muslim Brotherhood against the military. There's not much in the middle. And that's, I think, the reality of dealing with Egypt. The United States' role is going to have to be symbolic, because we don't have much influence in Egypt. It's a very difficult path for any president to walk. But at the end of the day, as much as we don't like the military, the last thing any of us should want, frankly, is for the Muslim Brotherhood as Americans to return to power in Egypt.
Peter, where do you stand?
Honestly, it's amazing to me how people like Ari, who said during the Bush administration that the agenda was supposed to be democracy, when Islamist parties that win, all of a sudden say that the most important thing is to prevent Islamist parties from winning. I don't think Morsy was a good leader. He wouldn't have been my first or second or third or fourth candidate. But the important principle here is that the United States does not rule out any political party from being able to run in elections. We simply support the principle of free elections, rule of law, and minority rights. And the Obama administration was played by the military, which made this big show of the idea that it would overthrow Morsy and bring a return back to democracy. Very rarely does that really happen with military coups. It didn't happen here, and we should have been much stronger against it.
I want you to be able to respond to that.
Yeah, I agree with the principle that he laid out, but it's also important to note that the Muslim Brotherhood did not govern in anything close to a democratic fashion. And the risk in the Arab Middle East is that people come to power through democracy or through coup, and then they become even worse. And that's what happened in Iran in the late 1970s. And that's not something we want to see happen in Egypt. That would not represent peace. It wouldn't represent stability. It wouldn't be good for anybody in the region.